The wind on the high prairie had always been Callum Reed's only true companion, a constant, whistling presence that filled the vast silence of his isolated frontier land. He was a man carved from the land itself, quiet, reserved, and utterly unremarkable, spending his days wrestling a meager living from the soil and tending to his few head of cattle. His small, clapboard cabin stood miles from the nearest settlement, a tiny bastion of civilization clinging to the edge of the known world, and that suited Callum just fine. He preferred the predictability of the earth and the animals to the complex, frightening uncertainty of human interaction. His shyness was a shield, forged by years of solitude and a deep, unspoken fear of failure. He was a farmer, not a frontiersman, and certainly not a hero. His world was small, manageable, and safe. That safety shattered just after noon on a sweltering Tuesday. He was out by the watering hole, repairing a fence post, when he heard the sound that didn't belong, the quick, purposeful rhythm of a galloping horse. He straightened, his hand instinctively resting on the worn grip of his sidearm, a gesture he rarely, if ever, had cause to complete. Over the rise, she appeared. She was Apache, and breathtakingly confident. Kiona was her name, though he wouldn't know it yet. She rode a painted mare with the effortless grace of someone born to the saddle, her buckskin garments fringed and adorned with beads, her long braids swinging. She pulled up 20 feet from him, the mare skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust. Kiona didn't dismount. She simply looked down at him, her dark eyes piercing and assessing, taking in his worn denim, his dirt-stained hands, and the hesitant posture that betrayed his inner turmoil. She carried herself with an authority that seemed to compress the vast prairie around them. The contrast between them was stark. Callum, the timid foundation of the white man's encroaching civilization, and unyielding spirit of the land itself. She spoke English, the words delivered with a crisp, low cadence that carried no trace of uncertainty. "You are Callum Reed." It was not a question, but a statement of fact. Callum swallowed, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. "I am. I have come to ask you for shelter. For passage. For the use of your well and the silence of your tongue for 3 days." She spoke with the economy of someone who values time and truth above pleasantries. Callum was stunned, not just by her presence, but by the sheer audacity of the request. To shelter an Apache, a non-treaty Apache at that, was an act of treason in the eyes of the army and an invitation to a lynching from his neighbors. His safety, his farm, his entire quiet existence depended on his adherence to the rules. I can't," he stammered, the word burning his throat. "If they find out, they'll hang me. Or worse. My neighbors, the army." Kiona's eyes remained steady, utterly devoid of judgment or pity. "Your fear is noted, Reed. Yet I ask. Not for myself alone. My brother is wounded. He is not far. He needs to move east, across the river, before the moon is full. He will not survive the journey without rest and tending. You are the only person between the river and the patrol trails." She paused, allowing the crushing weight of her honesty to settle upon him. "I offer you no reward. Only the certainty of a choice you must live with. You can send me away now, and you will be safe, but you will know what you have done. Or you can help, and face a different destiny." Her use of the word destiny seemed enormous, filling the sky and dwarfing the timid farmer standing before her. Callum looked from the determined face of the woman to the vast, intimidating expanse of the plains, which now seemed less a sanctuary and more a witness. He was being asked to choose between his survival, terrifying exposure of his own weakness. His whole life had been about avoiding moments like this. He had hidden behind fences and fields, constructing a world where no one could see his inadequacy. Kiona's simple, impossible request stripped away his protection, revealing the hollow space where courage should be. The silence stretched, filled only by the mare's impatient snorting and the relentless wind. He thought of his quiet, lonely nights, his predictable routines, the comfortable emptiness of his life. And he thought of a wounded man, Kiona's brother, lying somewhere in the unforgiving scrub, depending on the moral choice of a man too shy to even talk to the store owner in town. He took a shaky breath, finally meeting her gaze. "Not here," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "My cabin is too visible. There's an old root cellar, behind the south barn. It's dry. We can bring him there." Kiona's expression didn't change, but a minuscule softening around her eyes was the only acknowledgement of his monumental decision. "Good," she said, and spun her horse, disappearing back over the rise to retrieve her brother. Callum stood alone, the air thick with the scent of dust and danger. He had chosen vulnerability over safety, and now, his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the sudden, exhilarating reality of a life he had never prepared for. The next 3 days were a blur of intense, fearful coexistence. Kiona brought her brother, a powerful man named Chaska, and quickly, efficiently, took charge. She was a natural healer and a silent whirlwind of focused energy. Callum, despite his shyness, found a strange confidence in following her decisive orders. He brought water, tore up his last clean linens for bandages, and stood guard, watching the horizon with a vigilance he had never needed for his cattle. He saw the world through Kiona's eyes, the way she read the shifting winds, the signs of a distant dust cloud, the flight of a hawk as a warning. He learned respect not through formal instruction, but through quiet observation of her devotion to her brother and her fierce, yet controlled, competence. Their communication was sparse but deeply meaningful. Kiona never offered empty thanks, her gratitude was expressed in the way she shared her knowledge, teaching him how to dress the wound without causing Chaska undue pain, explaining the medicinal properties of local herbs, or showing him how to silently check the perimeter. Callum, in turn, found himself opening up, not in grand declarations, but in small, shared vulnerabilities. He spoke of his fear of failure, of why he chose this lonely patch of land, to avoid the judgment of others. Kiona listened, her expression thoughtful. "You hide behind your land, Callum Reed. The land is good, but it is not a shield. True strength is not in avoiding fear, but in choosing to act despite it." One evening, as the sun cast long, weary shadows across the prairie, Kiona sat beside the sleeping Chaska. Callum brought her a bowl of stew. She looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes held something other than assessment or determination, they held vulnerability. "I told you my request was impossible," she murmured. "I knew you would say no. But my people teach that sometimes the only way across a chasm is to ask for a bridge that cannot possibly exist. If you ask with honesty, sometimes, the human heart will build it anyway." Callum sat beside her, feeling the unprecedented connection, the sudden, shared weight of their secret and their impossible hope. "I was afraid, Kiona," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper, forcing the confession past his usual barrier of shyness. "I'm still afraid. But the fear of running away, of knowing I left a man to die because I was scared of the consequences, that fear became bigger than the fear of staying." Kiona reached out and touched his arm, a brief, firm contact that communicated more than 1,000 words. It was an acknowledgement of his courage, not his physical strength. On the 4th morning, Chaska was strong enough to ride. Kiona prepared their horses with practiced speed. Callum stood by the barn, watching them. The moment of truth had come. His choice had carried him this far, now it was time for them to leave, taking the danger with them. Kiona mounted her mare, turning to face him. Chaska, though still weak, managed a respectful nod. "You are a brave man, Callum Reed," Kiona said. "You built the bridge. We will not forget this." She looked around at his land, his cabin, the simple life he had risked. "Do not hide again. Your courage is not in your fences, but in your heart." Then, with a quiet turning of the horses, they rode off, disappearing into the vastness as silently as they had arrived. Callum stood alone again, the silence rushing back in, but this time, it was different. It was no longer empty, it was full of Kiona's words, of the memory of his own unexpected courage. His world was still small, but the man in it was transformed. He was still a shy farmer, but he had faced his deepest fear, the fear of vulnerability, and had found strength in choosing connection over isolation. He picked up his tools, ready to mend the fence, but the work felt different. He was no longer just maintaining a boundary, he was tending the earth on which a bridge had been built. He knew the risk was not over, someone might still find evidence. But now, he faced the uncertainty not with dread, but with a quiet, newfound resilience. His destiny had been rewritten by a single, simple choice, proving that the most profound transformations occur not through physical power, but through the courage to be vulnerable and